A veil is an article of clothing, a cloth hanging that is intended to cover some part of the head or face, or an object of some significance. It is especially associated with women and sacred objects. One view is that as a religious item, it is intended to show honor to an object or space. The actual sociocultural, psychological, and sociosexual functions of veils have not been studied extensively but most likely include the maintenance of social distance and the communication of social status and cultural identity. History. The first recorded instance of veiling for women is recorded in an Assyrian legal text from the 13th century BC, which restricted its use to noble women and forbade prostitutes and common women from adopting it. The Mycenaean Greek term apukowoko, possibly meaning headband makers or craftsmen of horse veil, and written in linear bisyllabic script, is also attested since California. 1300 BC. In ancient Greek, the word for veil was kappa alpha lambda upsilon beta rho alpha and is first attested in the works of Homer. Classical Greek and Hellenistic statues sometimes depict Greek women with both the head and face covered by a veil. Caroline Galton, Lloyd Llewellyn Jones have both argued from such representations and literary references that it was commonplace for women in ancient Greece to cover the hair and face in public. Roman women were expected to wear veils as a symbol of the husband's authority over his wife. A married woman who omitted the veil was seen as withdrawing herself from marriage. In 166 BC, Consul Sulpicius Gallus divorced his wife because she had left the house unveiled, thus allowing all to see, as he said, what only he should see. Unmarried girls normally didn't veil their heads, but matrons did so to show the modesty and chastity, the pudicitia. Veils also protected women against the evil eye, it was thought. For many centuries, until around 1175, Anglo-Saxon and then Anglo-Norman women, with the exception of young unmarried girls, wore veils that entirely covered the hair, and often the necks up to the chins. Only in the Tudor period, when hoods became increasingly popular, did veils of this type become less common. This depended greatly from one country to the other. In Italy, veils, including face veils, were worn in some regions until the 1970s. Women in southern Italy often covered their heads to show that they were modest, well-behaved and pious. They generally wore a cuffia, then the fazzoletto, a long triangular or rectangular piece of cloth that could be tied in various ways, and sometimes covered the whole face except the eyes, sometimes bent or a wimple underneath too. For centuries, women have worn sheer veils, but only under certain circumstances. Sometimes a veil of this type was draped over and pinned to the bonnet or hat of a woman in mourning, especially at the funeral and during the subsequent period of high mourning. They would also have been used as an alternative to a mask, as a simple method of hiding the identity of a woman who was traveling to meet a lover, or doing anything she didn't want other people to find out about. More pragmatically, veils were also sometimes worn to protect the complexion from sun and wind damage, or to keep dust out of a woman's face, much as a keffiyeh is used today. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the concept of covering the head was associated with propriety and modesty. Most traditional depictions of the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ, show her veil. During the Middle Ages, most European and Byzantine married women covered the hair rather than the face, with a variety of styles of wimple, kerchiefs and headscarves. Veiling, covering the hair rather than the face, was a common practice with church-going women until the 1960s, Catholic women typically using lace, and a number of very traditional churches retain the custom. Bonnets were the rule in non-Catholic churches. Lace-face veils are still often worn by female relatives at funerals in some Catholic countries. In Indian subcontinent, veiling is not sanctioned by the religions but some sections in society from 1st century B.C. advocated the use of the veil for married women, which came to be known as gunghat. Buddhists attempted to counter this growing practice around 3rd century CE. Rational opposition against veiling and seclusion from spirited ladies resulted in system not becoming popular for several centuries. Sikhism was also highly critical of strict veiling. Guru Amar Das condemned it and rejected seclusion and veiling of women, which saw a decline of veiling among some classes during late medieval period. Although religion is a common reason for choosing to veil, the practice also reflects political and personal conviction, so that it can serve as a medium through which personal character can be revealed. Judaism. After the destruction of the Temple in Jerusalem, the synagogues that were established took the design of the tabernacle as the plan. The Ark of the Law, which contains the scrolls of the Torah, is covered with an embroidered curtain, a veil called a paroche. Christianity. Among Christian churches which have a liturgical tradition, several different types of veils are used. These veils are often symbolically tied to the veils in the tabernacle in the wilderness and in Solomon's temple. The purpose of these veils was not so much to obscure as to shield the most sacred things from the eyes of sinful men. In Solomon's temple, the veil was placed between the inner sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. This veil was torn when Jesus Christ died on the cross. This symbolizes that now any man may enter the Holy of Holies and commune with God without the separation of sin. Tabernacle veil, used to cover the church tabernacle, particularly in the Roman Catholic tradition but in some others as well. When the Eucharist is actually stored in it, the veil is used to remind worshippers that the tabernacle cabinet echoes the tabernacle tent of the Hebrew Scriptures, and it signals that the tabernacle is actually in use. It may be of any liturgical color, but is most often white cloth of gold or silver, or the liturgical color of the day. It may be simple, unadorned linen or silk, or it may be fringed or otherwise decorated. It is often designed to match the vestments of the celebrants. Ciborium veil. The ciborium is a goblet-like metal vessel with a cover, used in the Roman Catholic Church and some others to hold the consecrated hosts of the Eucharist when, for instance, it is stored in the tabernacle or when communion is to be distributed. It may be veiled with a white cloth, usually silk. This veiling was formerly required but is now optional. In part, it signals that the ciborium actually contains the consecrated Eucharist at the moment. Chalice veil. During Eucharist celebrations, a veil is often used to cover the chalice and paten to keep dust and flying insects away from the bread and wine. Often made of rich material, the chalice veils have not only a practical purpose, but are also intended to show honor to vessels used for the sacrament. In the West, a single chalice veil is normally used. The veil will usually be the same material and color as the priest's vestments, though it may also be white. It covers the chalice and paten when not actually in use on the altar. In the East, 3 veils are used, one for the chalice, one for the discos, and a third one is used to cover both. The veils for the chalice and discos are usually square with 4 lappets hanging down the sides, so that when the veil is laid out flat it will be shaped like a cross. The air is rectangular and usually larger than the chalice veil used in the West. The air also figures prominently in other liturgical respects. Humeral veil. The humeral veil is used in both Roman Catholic and Anglican churches during the liturgy of exposition and benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, and on some other occasions when special respect is shown to the Eucharist. For the Latin four shoulders, it is an oblong piece of cloth worn as a sort of shawl, used to symbolize a more profound awareness of the respect due to the Eucharist by shielding the celebrant's hands from actually contacting the vessel holding the Eucharist, either a monstrance or ciborium, or in some cases to shield the vessel itself from the eyes of participants. It is worn only by bishops, priests or deacons. Vimper. A vimper is a veil or shawl worn over the shoulders of servers who carry the mitre and crozier in Roman Catholic liturgical functions when they are not being used by the bishop. Chancel veil. In the early liturgies, there was often a veil that separated the sanctuary from the rest of the church. In the Byzantine liturgy, this veil developed into the iconostasis, but a veil or curtain is still used behind the royal doors, and is opened and closed at specific times during the liturgy. In the West, it developed into the rood veil, and later the rood screen, and finally the chancel rail, the low sanctuary railing in those churches that still have this. In some of the Eastern churches, the use of a veil across the entire sanctuary has been retained. Lenten veiling. Some churches veil the crosses during Passiontide with a fine semi-transparent mesh. The color of the veil may be black, red, purple, or white depending upon the liturgical day and practice of the church. In traditional churches, there will sometimes be curtains placed to either side of the altar. The veil of Our Lady is a liturgical feast celebrating the protection afforded by the intercessions of the Virgin Mary. Traditionally, in Christianity, women were enjoined to cover their heads in church, just as it was customary for men to remove the hat as a sign of respect. This practice is based on 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 4 to 16, where St. Paul writes, "Any man who prays or prophesies with his head covered brings shame upon his head, but any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled brings shame upon her head. For it is one and the same thing as if she had had her head shaved. For if a woman does not have her head veiled, she may as well have her hair cut off. But if it is shameful for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, then she should wear a veil. A man, on the other hand, should not cover his head, because he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man, nor was man created for woman, but woman for man. For this reason a woman should have a sign of authority on her head, because of the angels. Woman is not independent of man, a man of woman in the Lord. For just as woman came from man, so man is born of woman. But all things are from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head unveiled? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears his hair long it is a disgrace to him, whereas if a woman has long hair it is her glory, because long hair has been given for a covering? But if anyone is inclined to be argumentative, we do not have such a custom, nor do the churches of God in many traditional Eastern Orthodox churches, and in some very conservative Protestant churches as well. The custom continues of women covering their heads in church. In the Roman Catholic Church, it was customary in most places before the 1960s for women to wear a head covering in the form of a scarf, cap, veil or hat when entering a church. The practice now continues where it is seen as a matter of etiquette, courtesy, tradition or fashionable elegance rather than strictly of canon law. Traditionalist Catholics also maintain the practice. The wearing of a head covering was for the first time mandated as a universal rule for the Latin Rite by the Code of Canon Law of 1917, which code was abrogated by the advent of the present Code of Canon Law. Traditionalist Catholics still follow it generally as a matter of custom and biblically approved aptness. Some also suppose that St. Paul's directive is in full force today as an ordinance of its own right without a canon law rule enforcing it. A veil over the hair rather than the face forms part of the headdress of some orders of nuns or religious sisters. This is why a woman who becomes a nun is said to take the veil. In medieval times, married women normally covered the hair outside the house, and a nun's veil is based on secular medieval styles, reflecting the nun's position as bride of Christ. In many institutes, a white veil is used as the veil of probation during novitiate, and a dark veil for the veil of profession once religious vows are taken. The color scheme varies with the color scheme of the habit of the order. A veil of consecration, longer and fuller, is used by some orders for final profession of solemn vows. Nuns of the female counterparts of monks, and many monastic orders of women have retained the veil. Regarding other institutes of religious sisters who are not cloistered but who work as teachers, nurses, or in other active apostolates outside of a nunnery or monastery, some wear the veil, while some others have abolished the use of the veil, and a few never had a veil to start with but used a bonnet-style headdress as in the case of St. Elizabeth and Seton. The fullest versions of the nun's veil cover the top of the head and flow down around and over the shoulders. In Western Christianity, it does not wrap around the neck or face. In those orders that retain one, the starched white covering about the face, neck and shoulders is known as a wimple and is a separate garment. The Catholic Church has revived the ancient practice of allowing women to be consecrated by the bishop as a consecrated virgin. These women are set aside as sacred persons who belong only to Christ and the service of the Church. They are under the direct care of the local bishop, without belonging to a particular order, and they receive the veil as a bridal sign of consecration. There has also been renewed interest in the last half-century in the ancient practice of women and men dedicating themselves as anchorites or hermits, and there is a formal process whereby such persons can seek recognition of the vows by the local bishop. A veil for these women would be traditional. Some Anglican women's religious orders also wear a veil, differing according to the traditions of each order. In Eastern Orthodoxy and in the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church, a veil called an epinokomelovkion is used by both nuns and monks, in both cases covering completely the kamelovkion, whose cylindrical hat they both wear. In Slavic practice, when the veil is worn over the hat, the entire headdress is referred to as a klobuk. Nuns wear an additional veil under the klobuk called an apostolnik, which is drawn together to cover the neck and shoulders as well as the head, leaving the face itself open. Biblical references include Hebrew mitpachat. In Isaiah chapter 3 verse 22, this word is plural, rendered wimples. RV, shawls, i.e., wraps. Book of Isaiah chapter 3 verse 23, the glasses, and the fine linen, and the hoods, and the veils. Massacre. The word denotes something spread out and covering or concealing something else. Masva, the veil on the face of Moses. This verse should be read, and when Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face, as in the Revised Version. When Moses spoke to them, he was without the veil. Only when he ceased speaking, he put on the veil. Parashe, the veil of the tabernacle and the temple, which hung between the holy place and the most holy. In the temple, a partitioned wall separated these two places. In it were two folding building doors, which are supposed to have been always open, the entrance being concealed by the veil which the high priest lifted when he entered into the sanctuary on the Day of Atonement. This veil was rent when Christ died on the cross. Tziph. Rebecca took a veil and covered herself. Hebrew women generally appeared in public without veils. Radi. The word probably denotes some kind of cloak or wrapper. Masik. The veil which hung before the entrance to the holy place. Note Genesis chapter 20 verse 16, which the King James Version renders as, "And unto Sarah he said, Behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eyes, and to all that are with thee, and with all other." Thus she was reproved has been interpreted in one source as implied advice to Sarah to conform to a supposed custom of married women, and wear a complete veil, covering the eyes as well as the rest of the face, but the phrase is generally taken to refer not to Sarah's eyes, but to the eyes of others, and to be merely a metaphorical expression concerning vindication of Sarah, silencing criticism, allaying suspicions, righting a wrong, covering a recompensing the problem caused her, a sign of her innocence. The final phrase in the verse, which KJV takes to mean, "she was reproved," is taken by almost all other versions to mean instead, "she was vindicated," and the word, which KJV interprets as he, is interpreted as it. Thus, the general view is that this passage has nothing to do with material veils. Islam, a variety of headdresses worn by Muslim women and girls in accordance with hijab, are sometimes referred to as veils. The principal aim of the Muslim veil is to cover the aura. Many of these garments cover the hair, ears and throat, but do not cover the face. The khimar is a type of headscarf. The niqab and burqa are two kinds of veils that cover most of the face except for a slit hole for the eyes. In Algeria, a larger veil called the haik includes a triangular panel to cover the lower part of the face. The Afghan burqa covers the entire body, obscuring the face completely, except for a grille netting over the eyes to allow the wearer to see. The boshiya is a veil that may be worn over a headscarf. It covers the entire face and is made of a sheer fabric so the wearer is able to see through it. It has been suggested that the practice of wearing a veil, uncommon among the Arab tribes prior to the rise of Islam, originated in the Byzantine Empire, and then spread. In Central Asian sedentary Muslim areas, women wore veils which, when worn, the entire face was shrouded, called parani or farangi. The traditional veil in Central Asia worn before modern times was the farangi, but it was banned by the Soviet Communists. Restrictions. The wearing of head and especially face coverings by Muslim women has raised political issues in the West, including in Quebec and across Europe. Countries and territories that have banned or partially banned the veil include France, where full-face veils have been banned in public places since April 2011, with a €150 fine for breaching the ban. Belgique also banned full-face veils in public places in July 2011. Spain has several towns and cities which have banned the full-face veil, including Barcelona. Sevastopol has announced a ban on hijab, which was challenged but upheld by the Russian Supreme Court. Places where headscarves continue to be a contentious political issue include United Kingdom, where the Home Office Minister Jeremy Brown called for a national debate about headscarves and the role in public environments in Britain. Quebec, where there is much discussion as to whether the province should allow people wearing a veil over the face to vote without removing it. Europe, with a large Muslim population, the EU has allowed countries to ban full-face veils, as it does not breach the European Convention on Human Rights. Hats. Veils pinned to hats have survived the changing fashions of the centuries and are still common today on formal occasions that require women to wear a hat. However, these veils are generally made of netting or another material not actually designed to hide the face from view, even if the veil can be pulled down.